Hello, apes. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to go through some of the big major points of chapter 1 as like a little mini lecture. You will have the entire PowerPoint at your disposal on Schoology for you to take any more detailed notes that you may want. But as part of being a college level course, some things are going to be left up to you. And chapter 1's a good practice for that. So, like I said, I'm going to go through this and present specific things that I think are the highlights that I'm going to go over. Okay? So, chapter 1. So, in chapter 1, what is environmental science? Well, it's the class that you're enrolled in, right? Duh. But really, in layman's terms, the easiest way to think about it is that it's how we look at the natural world and how humans interact with that and how these systems interact as well. So I really like this diagram down here because it shows you that we have the environmental sciences and all possible different branches here, which we are definitely going to go into. But then some of the social sciences and more in terms of how humans interplay with that as well. We will talk somewhat about those, but that's definitely a great area in college if you're interested in this. That is a booming area for jobs right now. So let's talk about what natural resources are. Again, some of this may be review to you, some of it may not. But natural resources are ones that we obviously get from the planet in some form or fashion. We do have renewable ones and we have non-renewable ones. Just remember, renewable means it can be replenished when we say short periods of time, probably within about a decade to maybe 2 decades. Within that's kind of considered to be an acceptable renewable timeline. Now, that would be things like trees. If we were talking about living organisms like harvesting for fish or crops, then that would be much shorter term. Non-renewable is basically we only have so much. If we use it all, it will take more than would be an accepted timeline for us to be able to get it back again. Meaning that fossil fuels will possibly, yeah, they'll be there again in millions and millions of years, but that's whenever what is currently being processed into that finishes that process. Okay, so systems are, there's a good definition here. I like this. It's a set of interacting components and that can influence one another, and we can exchange energy or sometimes materials. Environmental systems is another term that you'll hear a lot because systems, environmental systems make up this topic of environmental science. They can be man-made and they can be natural. And one thing that we're going to really focus on here are ecosystems. And ecosystems, if you think back from biology, include the biotic and abiotic components. Biotic meaning living, abiotic meaning non-living. Yes, we people, we're bad. We manipulate the environment and we do so at a much higher rate and than any other species. Yes, other organisms might like drill a hole in a tree for their little nest, but they don't tear down complete areas of ecosystems to build concrete buildings, okay? They don't burn fossil fuels and then release byproducts into the air like we do, all right? So, and most of these other organisms, they tend to have their populations in check by natural checks and balances. But humans, since we're basically top of the food chain, we just keep on making more of ourselves. Okay, so let's go over a couple more definitions. Environmental services are things that, these are services that we get from the natural environment. This is where we get our timber. This is where, not fish farms, okay? Don't think fish farms, but think, going out and line casting for fish, or using the land to graze animals that would already be there, like bison. Environmental indicators, these are very important, and there are lots of them. It's ways that we use to kind of help us identify the health state of the environment. We can look at things like water quality. Chemistry plays a huge role in this. We can look at whether or not certain animals are thriving versus not. If they are, their numbers are declining, then that's a good environmental indicator that there's an issue. There are 5 global environmental indicators. You have to know these, so write these down if you haven't. There's biodiversity, which we will talk about in great extent. Food production, that's another topic. Carbon dioxide concentrations, yeah, we know where we are on that. And if you don't, you will. Human population, oh, that's going up. And resource depletion. And that we're really focusing more on human used resources for this content here, okay? So biodiversity, it's what lives in an environment. And biodiversity really looks at the living part here. So we're mostly looking at the biotic factors and those organisms. And remember, there's a lot of possible different organisms. We're not just talking about plants and animals. We're also talking about the bacteria, the fungi, all the little protists, everything, right? These are all major parts of this. Don't just think of the big, cute, cuddly things that we see. Also take into account other parts of this. We will talk about how there is genetic diversity, species diversity, and overall ecosystem diversity. If you have high levels of these types of diversity, then you typically have a really solid, healthy environment. So let's go into genetic diversity. This is basically saying, can this gene pool, can it survive certain circumstances in the environment, all right? So if you have a high genetic diversity, then that means that you're much more likely to respond to environmental change. Some organisms have not been able to adapt to temperature rising very well because they may have lacked that in their genetic diversity. There may have been genes somewhere along the line that were coded for them to thrive at a slightly cooler temperature. But there's been a few species, this is kind of cool. So there's been a few species where certain like colors of birds, or especially insects, have been doing okay with temperature rising. And in fact, their numbers are increasing. And why? Because they think that there's something else genetic there that allows their bodies to better temper the temperature changes. So kind of a cool thing. Species diversity is the overall number of the species in an environment. So frogs are probably one of the most diverse like examples of this, and one of the best, because this like little picture that you see here from down here in the corner, that's just not even like a pinky worth of the species of frogs that exist in a tropical rainforest. Frogs have a huge species diversity, but they're also, but on the flip side, they're not very genetically diverse. They don't tend to adapt well genetically. They are very susceptible to sudden changes, and they don't thrive in that very well. But the fact that there is a large species diversity, then that shows, hey, if all of these species of frogs are thriving, then we're probably in a pretty good place in terms of environmental health. If the number of species has declined, then that is a big red flag. We'll also talk briefly later on, around chapter 3, about speciation and the evolution of new species. Ecosystem diversity. So this is like the overall measure of diversity within an ecosystem. It could be a habitat. It could even be like a niche of that. But what we do is we look at how the land area is utilized. And so if you have a lot of variety of plants and crops, and you have a healthy fungi population going on to help with decomposition, if you have a wide range and variety of different animals and other organisms, then typically you have a good ecosystem diversity. All right, I'm going to pause this recording here and I'll start again.